Welcome, friends, it's the MovieFilm Podcast. MovieFilm Podcast, enjoy the show. Zachy and Brian are talking about the movies. MovieFilm Podcast on the radio.
Welcome to Movie Film. It's episode 287, brought to you by Mr. Boy Productions. I'm Zachy Hassan. I'm here with Brian Hall.
Hey, how's it going, Zachy?
Hey, you know, I know I talked to you last week. We did, right? Last week we recorded.
Yeah, Ghostbusters 2, I believe.
Is it just me, or does it feel like it's been a while?
It does.
Right?
It really does.
Yeah.
Actually, even seeing Ghostbusters, it hasn't been even a full week yet, but it feels like I saw that a while ago. I don't know what that means, but
it definitely feels like it, yeah. And we will discuss Ghostbusters Frozen Empire later in this episode.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, have you seen anything else?
Yeah, you know, actually, a series I like, I forgot to put this on the document, but a series I like has returned that airs on Vice channel, if you have that, and it's called Icons Unearthed.
Okay.
And it usually does a deep dive into one thing per season. So one season they did The Simpsons, and it was a very good deep dive. They have people who were there, you know, on the ground floor. I mean, right down to production assistants who will be like, oh, I'll tell you what it was like, you know, kind of stories. And this season, they're doing two at the same time. They're doing one for Batman.
Okay.
And so the first episode was sort of about, you know, the creation, and then Michael Usulan and how he got the film started, and beginning the Tim Burton film. And there's another one that's about the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And they're just, you know, sometimes you watch these things and I get a little wary because I'm like, well, I read about this stuff so much and I'm so immersed in it that I don't know they're really going to tell me or show me anything I don't know. Right. It's, you know, it's going to be a little surfacey, but I find these to be very good, actually. They're fun. You know, they have a fun tone to them, but they do show a lot of great behind the scenes stuff I've never seen before. And Sean Young is a participant. So she talks about being Vicky Vale for a minute.
Right.
You know, she shows a lot of Polaroids that she took in the rehearsals with her and Jack Nicholson, and, you know, the horseback riding, infamous horseback riding.
The infamous, right?
Yeah, and so I there's only one episode so far at this point, but I've seen other seasons and I know they do a great job, so I'm excited to keep going with the Batman one. I feel like it's something you might enjoy too.
Yeah, well, I know they did like a James Bond season.
Yep.
Which I have not seen, but I know of it.
Yeah, I think for what they do it pretty well. It's entertaining, but they also they don't just scratch the surface and say the cursory stories you've heard a million times. You know, they dig in, they find some interesting footage, and it's fun. I think it's fun for fans of whatever they're covering.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then I'm a little lighter this week, but I saw two films I thought I'd talk about, very different from one another. The first one is called One Life.
Okay.
And I'll read the description here. It says, Sir Nicholas Nicky Winton, a young London broker who in the months leading up to World War II rescued over 600 children from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. And people may be familiar with this if they go on Reddit, you know, with frequency, because there's a clip that goes around, I would say every several months, where basically there's a BBC show from the 80s where they highlight this person. They say, hey, this old man, you know, many years ago, he saved over 600 refugee children during World War II, and he's here with us today in the audience. And the big reveal is that everyone in the audience around him, their lives have been affected by his work. So they're either one of the children who was rescued grown up, or, you know, they're a grandkid or something like that. And it's a very moving clip. Every time I watch it, every time it pops up because it's so sweet and amazing. And so this is kind of funny how we saw this. Federica and I had no plans to see this, but we just wanted popcorn. And so we were like, let's go to the movies, because we have that Regal pass, you know, so it doesn't cost anything.
So you went out just because you wanted popcorn.
Truly. And we were looking at what was playing, and we had already seen Ghostbusters, and we were like, well, what's this? And I knew about the clip. So I was like, oh, wait, I know this story. And she didn't. And now I kind of apologize to the listeners because I sort of spoiled it a little bit. But but I think many people have seen that. And as someone who has seen that clip, it's still worth seeing because now you're getting the full context of that story. And so you get to see Anthony Hopkins plays Nicholas as an older man. And so, you know what I mean? There's like a framing device of him in the present, quote unquote present. It's the 80s. And then we also get the other half of the story is how he was motivated to do this, to help these refugee children, and also how he went about doing it. And it was very good. We really enjoyed it. I mean, I think I would, if I was to throw out any caveat, I would say it's a very quiet film. It actually felt a little bit like an episode of sort of like a PBS Masterpiece Theater. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's very, it's very static. It feels no need to be sensational. And I think that's good, but I did also feel it occasionally where I was like, oh, this is a very patient, tempered, slower film. And, but I think the story itself is really, really interesting, and it's just amazing to see, one person choosing to make a difference against all odds and the branching effect that can have. And it makes you think about your own life. And then, I may not do something on this scale, but if you help one person out, that person may help someone else out. And I always find stories like that very encouraging and inspiring. And so, I think for people who, if this sounds interesting, and again, knowing that it's not like a thrill a minute necessarily movie, it's a really sweet story. And I mean, kind of I think an important story, inspiring wise. So, I would recommend it. I'd recommend it. One Life. I think it's, I don't know how out there it is in theaters. I mean, we didn't even know it existed till we were looking for something to watch, but I can imagine on streaming, it could be something you could check out a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So are you familiar with that clip? Have you seen that?
I have not.
Yeah. It's even worth if people want to look that up. I mean, it's just a really it stirring clip. It's really sweet.
The real question is, was the popcorn worth it?
It absolutely was.
Okay.
It absolutely was. I don't know.
Accomplished.
I mean, the trick I do is it's not even a trick, but I mean, when you go, you earn these points. And I was talking to other people who have the Regal Unlimited app, and I don't know that they even knew that you can redeem those points for free popcorn. So like, I have so many points now that I don't even pay for the popcorn. It's like this routine now. I go up. I usually just get a small though, so I don't get a big, huge one. But I get the small popcorn, do the app, show it to the person. They click it. This is $0 on the register. I take the popcorn and I walk away. So it's kind of a cool little routine at the moment.
The only cost is the clogged arteries.
That's, you know what? True. And it was my birthday yesterday, and I am 44, and I am realizing like there are things now that I have to keep closer tabs on than I used to.
Isn't that depressing?
It is a little bit. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd call it depressing the right word, but it did make me reflect a little bit.
It's sobering, let's say.
It's sobering.
I've gone, I've been on this diet since like the start of the year almost, and I've gone several months without dairy.
That's right. Yes.
And bread, and that's been quite the adjustment, like I have to really think long and hard about having like a slice of pizza, Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I had to have my blood drawn a week ago, just, routine sort of stuff. But I was feeling like, Federica had been out of town a little bit for a business trip. And I was sort of like, I'm going to have ice cream tonight. I'm going to have ice cream the next night. And I just kind of did what I wanted. And I started to notice it on my body. And knowing that the blood was being drawn, my cholesterol was a little high. The last visit, so I was like, okay, like I really want to have like good results here. So I started to like behave myself, and I lost weight. I looked better. I was like, okay, like this is worth doing, right? So now I'm a little bit back into that routine, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'd be a little more
thoughtful about the things that I
mean, it's I met somebody a couple days ago who hadn't seen me in a while, and they're like, "Hey, where's the rest of you?"
Really? Well,
Which obviously that's nice, but also that's kind of not nice, right? Like,
well, you know what though? Yes, because then it makes you. It's one of those things that you think about later at night, where you're like, "Wait a minute, there's like implication there." But at the same time, that's amazing. If you're doing that much work and you are sweating over a slice of pizza, isn't it nice to hear that people have noticed?
it is nice. It is nice.
Yeah. So.
Well, in that vein, we're talking about the stuff that we were able to do as kids can't do anymore. I've been sort of reliving my childhood over the last few weeks because I've been watching X-Men 97.
I have been reading so much about this. So it seems like the word on the street is this is very good, but I want to hear this from you, someone I know was a fan of the series in the 90s. What is it like jumping back in? I mean, does this feel like you're back in 1997 and this is the next week on Fox TV and you're getting to watch the next episode? I mean, what is it like?
So yeah, the backstory obviously is that the X-Men animated show, which ran from 92 to 97, was really a game changer, for kids in the 90s. I mean, you experienced it even if you didn't watch the show, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah. My brother was really into it, and I kind of watched it with him. Like it was his thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I had been a fan of the X-Men comics for a few years before the show started. So for me, I remember when that show started and suddenly everybody became an X-Men fan, and it was a little bit for me like, oh, it's like when a band like gets too popular. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was your thing.
It was my thing,
Yeah.
But obviously, it was cool to see this thing, which really was like inside. You know what I mean? Like it's people may not even recognize that. Like there was a time when the measure of somebody's fandom was if they knew about the X-Men. Now it's like, well, it's the X-Men. Everybody knows the X-Men.
Right.
And it was this cartoon that did it, and I reviewed the show for the Chronicle, and that was the point that I made. I'm like, there's no MCU without the X-Men cartoon. Like, think about that.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time you had a translation of the source material that took into account the expansiveness of these stories and telling them in serialized form. And that's really what X-Men did, which was really, in terms of American animation, it was unheard of. Episodes would continue into the next. Every episode would start with previously on. Other than anime did that.
Yeah.
But not stateside, right? It became mainstream with X-Men. The animation was not great in the original show, but the stories were pretty solid, And so now you have this show 26 years later, 27 years now, right? And it's like people who grew up with it who are like, hey, let's pick up where they left off, So the animation is fantastic. They've gotten many of the voice actors back, which is pretty cool. Many of the surviving cast members.
Oh,
and Eric Lewald and Julia Lewald, they were the story editors on the original show. Larry Houston, who's the producer, they're consultants on this new one.
That's great. I mean, that's what you want as a fan, exactly. Right? I mean, you're getting the team back together.
So, and probably most importantly of all, they brought back the theme music.
I've seen that. I've seen the clip because I mean that thing it's a banger. It's so good.
It really it's you watch this reanimated version of the X-Men theme and you're like, God, I mean it's like hearing the Jurassic Park theme in the new Jurassic movies and stuff. I mean it's just like it's like sense memory.
Yep.
But very solid. They've dropped 3 episodes so far and pulling heavily from the comic books from the 80s and 90s, which was kind of like my X-Men era. So I'm very selfish. I'm like, well, this speaks very specifically to my experience, which is what is most important. But just a terrific animation. So, I mean, this is Marvel's first X-Men thing. Like they've not had the rights all this time. They have the rights back. This is their first thing out the chute.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Right.
And I mean, it's beating Deadpool, by a few months. So I'm kind of like, well, if this is an indication of how they're going to approach the X-Men, that is a cause for optimism, you know?
Isn't that great? I mean, we talk about that often where someone will take a property that everyone is a fan of, but then they feel like they have to tweak it or
Yeah.
put some sort of spin on it for who knows what reason, when it's really like, no, just give me the thing. You know, you don't need to, you know, like surprise me or something. Like, I'm here for the thing. Just give me the
Yeah.
thing. And I think that's what's so cool about this is, instead of, I mean, you know, they could have come up with a new series that I'm sure would have been great, but amazing they went back to something that was beloved and allowed it to continue to be itself.
Yeah. It has been amusing, I should say, watching some of the social media meltdown as certain folks grit their teeth and rend their garments because the X-Men have gone woke.
Well, it's funny when he said outrage or whatever word he just said. It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. So, you know, it's like you just leave room for that in part of the conversation because it's inevitable. Sure.
It's like, oh, you mean the thing about the group of people who are hated and feared just because of who they are? They've suddenly gone woke, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well,
what does Dan think? I'm curious. Has he watched it?
I don't even know that he knows about it, if I'm being honest. I gotta tell him about it. I'm sure he would
give him
love
the
it.
heads up. I'm waiting with bated breath for his reaction.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about also the way that show paved the way for the movies to exist and you know, primed so many people. I mean, yeah, it makes me think of my brother who did not read comic books. I did a little bit, but he didn't really read comic books. But I would join him for an episode of this, and he would bring me up to speed. Like, okay, so Storm, you know, like he knew all the like it was a primer, and it got him into it, and he was then thrilled about the film. So it's very cool.
Living overseas in the 80s and early 90s, you know, X-Men was my jam when I was living in Saudi Arabia. So I was building up this collection of X-Men comics while living overseas. And I would say it's, you know, 91 was like the peak of my fandom. And then right when we moved back to the States, the cartoon started that fall. So it was like the perfect time, you know?
That's amazing.
And that fall, it was Batman and X-Men, both on Fox, you know?
I do remember Batman. That was appointment viewing for me. Knowing it was even debuting, I was like, all right, it's Monday. Yep. Here it is. I was so excited about that show.
I mean, but both of those, it's like that's just a moment, you know? I remember I'd be watching Fox Kids and I'd be watching the whole block, you know, Tiny Toons and all that stuff. And I'd be waiting impatiently for the commercials just so I could see a little snippet of either Batman or X-Men.
That's so great.
You know, like kids, they'll never understand that, right? Because now everything is like a YouTube thing away, you know?
You know, it's funny, as you said that, I related to that anticipation, but then realized now with this series that you could just pull it up.
Yep.
Know, like you just,
there it is.
Just watch it. It's right there. It's all waiting for you. Well, I saw one more thing that was a little bit of a throwback in a way, I guess. I watched the remake of Roadhouse.
Oh yeah. So this has been getting very polarized reactions.
Oh, has it? I have not seen really any of them, to be honest. So I had.
I don't sound very thrilled.
Well, no, it's a kind of an interesting conversation. Have you seen the original Roadhouse, and have you seen the remake of Roadhouse?
I've not seen the remake. I saw the original, but I mean, it has been a minute. Probably last time I saw it was in the 90s.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I watched it for the first time within the last year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think it was on cable or something. And it was one of those things where even like Family Guy makes jokes about it, you know, Peter kicking people and saying Roadhouse. And I thought, okay, I got to see what this is all about. And I enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it was quirky and different. And yeah, I just enjoyed it for the artifact that it was. So anyway, then when I saw that Doug Liman was going to do a remake of Roadhouse starring Jake Gyllenhaal, who tends to make interesting films, right? You know, Nightcrawler and all these sorts of things. I was like, well, what's that going to look like? And also the 80ness of it, of the 80s Roadhouse is what makes it what it is and why I think it's remembered. So I was like, what does that look like in 2024?
Mhm.
And so after watching it, I realized there's 80s good dumb and there's 2020s good dumb.
Okay.
And as crazy as it sounds, 2020s good dumb makes 80s good dumb look accomplished.
Okay.
So, I mean, as dumb as the original is, like, it has like details. I feel like this movie doesn't have any details.
That's
So-
really interesting.
So, you know, the 80s one, there's more characterization to all the characters. There's more layers to the story. There's more romance. You know, there's quirk. There's more quirk to sort of shake your head at and secretly love, you know, in the 80s version. But man, the 2020s version is just so simple. You know, it's
Wow.
just,
Okay.
yeah, it's really weird. But, you know, I didn't hate myself for watching it when it was over because I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. But I would put it on par with like a middle to good Liam Neeson action film, you know, where it's like, you know, like,
Okay.
but although I'll say it's, you know, it's nice because it takes place in the Florida Keys. It's very bright and flashy, beautiful locations, a lot of energy in the fights. But this movie, man, is paper thin, just paper
Wow.
thin. Like
Okay.
and it just didn't need to be. It was just amazing that to me, it made the older movie look nuanced.
Now are you saying it didn't need to be or it didn't need to be?
I don't mind that it existed, like, because I did enjoy watching it, as dumb as it is. But I was also like, why? Like, if you have this previous movie that has all this sort, like the Dalton, the character played by Patrick Swayze, like he has an ethos. You know what I mean? Like his whole thing is be nice. Right? He's like, anytime there's a fight, like, you be nice, because that's what de-escalates something. And like he has like a code, you know,
Okay.
and there's like there's a whole understanding of who he is and why he is. And in this one, they try to give Dalton, the Jake Gyllenhaal version, like a characteristic, I suppose, but it is very. I'll just spoil this one thing. Basically, he killed a guy in the ring. He's a UFC fighter, and he killed a guy in the ring. That's interesting, but you never quite learn why. And you learn a little bit more details about that person who was in the ring. And it's like, whoa, so what was that about? Can we get it? But it's, the movie doesn't care. Like, he just needs, if he doesn't have something, then, you know, they could be accused of not giving him something. So they just gave him something and we're like, got it, let's go. And even the villains, I mean, like the villain in the first one, he's just so much more palpable and understandable. He's this guy who runs this town. He has this town under his thumb, and everyone hates him, you know, and no one will stand to him and his goons, you know. And in this one, it's just, everything feels like the story just feels off to the side, off screen, and it never, every now and then they'll be like, yeah, my dad wants to, you know, bring the Roadhouse to the ground so we can build over it with a resort or something like that. But it's just, that's kind of it. And the characters are more just there to sneer and then watch Gyllenhaal punch them. And it was so, like, the visceralness of it made me not hate myself for watching it when it was over, because at least it looked kind of fun. But you're just like, wow, I can't believe it made the 80s movie actually look good. You know, it's
That's
just
really funny.
So hollow and limp. Story-wise and everything. And there's, you know, like in the first film, there's a doctor that Dalton falls for, but in this one, I mean, you could probably look at the 80s one and be like, wow, what an underwritten love story. But you look at this one and it's like, literally looks like this love story was inserted into this movie against the movie's will. You know, like it's like someone was like, okay, we need a love story. Let's take 3 Post-it notes. Like, meets girl, she likes him for inexplicable reasons. She gets kidnapped and he saves her, and they just shoved it into random pages in the script so they could say they had it. Like, it's just so nothing. It is absolutely nothing. But at the same time, I was kind of in the mood. I knew what I was signing up for. I knew I was signing up for something kind of dumb, but hopefully fun. So I will say, yes, I did enjoy watching dumb fun, but I also marveled a little bit at how. I mean, especially coming from Doug Liman, I kind of expect a little bit more from him, if I'm being honest. I mean, the Bourne trilogy and Edge of Tomorrow, and he did Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is what it is. But that movie looks like The Godfather next to this one, so it's. I don't know. I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit. It's hard to recommend unless that is what you're in the mood for, like a totally dumb, colorful guy punches bad guys, 2 hours are up, it ends kind of thing.
Well, it sounds like those who like that sort of thing will find it the sort of thing they like.
Yep. Yeah.
Here's another thing I saw. This has been getting a lot of conversation on social media. It's a docuseries called Quiet on the Set.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of reactions to this.
Yeah, so this is an expose about the toxic work environment at Nickelodeon, essentially in late 90s into the 2000s. So this is not an era of television I'm particularly familiar with. I had passed it by at that point, but I knew of it, these shows, and just kind of looking at how Dan Schneider, who's like the head, the creative figurehead for these shows, fostered at best a very unpleasant environment, and at worst he allowed kids to be abused by essentially looking the other way.
Yeah, I am a little familiar with this story. I know this has sort of been out there, and sort of the people are looking back on some of the content of those episodes and seeing things that they may not have noticed before, sort of creepy. I don't know what the word is. Putting kids in like weirdly, almost like fetish like scenarios, yes. and with the information we have now, looking back on it, saying, oh, looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, for the last 10 years or so, he's been kind of persona non grata at Nickelodeon. And at least over the last 10 years is when this stuff started coming out, where people were looking at, really stuff where these are adolescent actors. Adolescent girls who are being asked to perform scenes on screen that, like you're saying, it's a little bit like, really, dude, like you don't know better,
right?
Wait,
when you say that, I mean, who are you saying? To their parents, or are you saying to?
Well, the scripts that they're given, and there's a whole machinery in place. So at best, the parents are uninformed. At worst, they're actively choosing to ignore it, right?
Yeah, sure.
Really, one of the stories that's gotten the most press is how Drake Bell was just subject to horrific abuse by somebody who was like a dialogue coach on these shows, and really, you hear what he describes, and some of the other lots of now grown up actors from all that, and whatever what's that? Zoe 101 and all these shows. They're like, yeah, it was messed up, And it's definitely, I mean, it's an old thing where you're just like, why on earth would you, as a parent, would you willingly subject your kids to this type of environment,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different degrees of it, I mean, frankly, working on some of the shows I've worked on, there's child actors involved, right? And it's what's from what I've seen, it's been nice that the parents are always there, the present in all the scenarios and whatnot. But then you hear these stories. I mean, like the Michael Jackson documentary that came out a while back, where the parents are like, sure, go spend the night with this guy over there.
Yeah.
And we will completely, like we won't even be present, or even like on the grounds, like we drop you off.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I cannot wrap my head around that. There's no scenario where I can imagine a parent doing that, making any sense.
It's baffling. And this guy, Brian Peck, who he went to jail for assaulting Drake Bell. It's so funny because the name was like familiar to me. And then I was realizing that he recorded a commentary track for the first X-Men movie with Bryan Singer.
Oh no.
Yeah, exactly. And now he has no connection to X-Men, right?
Right.
But he's just buddies with Bryan Singer. And I'm like, boy, if that's not just the most,
Yeah.
That you know what I mean? And for those of you who don't know, just Google Bryan Singer.
Right.
And so what you realize, my point is that there is a culture that fosters this type of thing, and for a long time. And it's interesting because the whole the Dan Snyder of it all, like he seems like not a great guy. He's not accused of doing anything inappropriate, but a lot of the scripts were by him, and so at he was at least passively sexualizing these kids. You know what I mean?
And maybe thinking it was amusing.
Exactly.
Right.
And above and beyond that, I mean, he was disrespectful to females who worked on the set, be they makeup artists or costume. I mean, or writers, just really like a jerk, But my point is, it was allowed to go on for a long time because, well, he was bringing a lot of money into Nickelodeon.
Right.
And, well, it's not a new story that when people have a financial interest, they will look the other way.
Yeah. Man, it's, I don't know. It's, I'm not thinking of anything specific, but it is just sort of amazing. It feels like it's a very recent thing that we've woken up to some of this, some of the people, some of the content, some of the environments where actors of all ages, are trying to just work and not be exploited in any way. But you do look back at some of these older shows sometimes and think, I don't know, like, how was that? How did anyone let that slide? Or
yeah.
Ugh.
I mean, I say this all the time, right? When it like with Harvey Weinstein, I was a kid going to high school in the Midwest in the 90s, and I knew Harvey Weinstein was a bad guy. And is that because I had any special insight? No. If I knew it, everybody knew it. So we're talking mid 90s. And when did he finally get his uppance? 2017?
Yeah.
It took that long.
Yeah.
So that only happens when you have an entire apparatus built around protecting these people, And Dan Snyder, by the way, he was on. Did you watch Head of the Class when you were a kid?
I just saw this in an article that it was that guy, and I did not put that together.
Yeah, him. He was, he was Dennis, the heavier set kid in Head of the Class, and then Brian Robbins, who was like the cool kid. He's like the president of Paramount.
I know, it's wild,
so random.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's streaming on HBO Max, so people can check that out there.
Okay.
Well, why don't we take a short break and we'll come back with some listener letters. And we are back, and we got some letters, Brian. It's been kind of. I've been hoping for us to get back to regular show because we've got so many notes from our listeners that I wanted to try to get to.
Yeah.
So here's a note. And this is from Adam Lance Hendrickson. He says, Zachy and Brian, first off, your podcast continues to be the best of the best. Thank you so much for the time, candor, and enthusiasm. I always lean forward and perk up whenever David Lynch's name is mentioned, so to have that Dune commentary is quite special. It should be known and celebrated that David Lynch is also on Disney+. The Straight Story is an underrated gem.
I forget about that, and I have not seen that. I would like to watch that.
Oh, you've never seen it?
No.
Oh, it's a good movie. That is.
I just DVR'd The Elephant Man, which I also haven't seen. So
You should watch the two of them back to back. It'll be quite a bipolar experience.
Yeah. Okay.
Secondly, wow, Dune Part 2. Oppenheimer took sound and vision to a whole new level in a way I was totally unprepared for last year. This year, Dune Part 2 might be even more so. I've heard Red Letter Media mentioned every now and then on the podcast. I'm drawn to their notion that after viewing a movie, you can rewind it in your head and know whether you were hooked or not from the opening seconds. That was this movie for me. Hearing whatever wind instrument Hans Zimmer had constructed in the delicate opening seconds of Beginnings are such delicate times. Opening piece of the soundtrack, I was hooked. And by the time we arrive at A Time of Quiet Between the Storms, I was a blubbering mess. A musical theme given to House Atreides in Dune Part 1 is transformed into the most gorgeous themes I've ever heard. It made Leto present for Paul in Part 2. I'm in awe of this film and of your podcast.
Well, thank you, Adam. I thought you were going to read his sign off.
Oh, yeah, I should say he signs off Adam, not the Magnificent Ambersons one, Lance Hendrickson.
The Adam, that means
that is
a lot. Thank you very much. And I agree. I mean, about Dune, Federica hasn't seen it, and every now and then I'll think about it, or something will remind me, and I'll be like, oh yeah, there's a scene, it was like this, you know. So, yeah, I think I'd like to see it one more time in the theater if I can.
Yeah, it was. I've seen it twice now, and I really relished my second viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, I mean, that has been one of those rare things where it's not just people going back to see it again and again, but it's a genuine word of mouth hit.
Yeah,
which has been nice to see.
And I love that something that feels not like straightforward hero's journey necessarily, is resonating, you know, in the popular culture. I think it's very cool to see something just a little left of center, you know, capturing everyone's imaginations. That's very exciting.
Yeah. Here's a note we got from Alex Naum, who says, hello, gents. It's been wonderful hearing different listeners' formative theater-going experiences, and gosh dang it, now I'm hopping aboard this train. I'm 36 years old, so these will be two naughties experiences for you.
Great.
Firstly, in 2003, I went with my sister and her friend to see Pirates of the Caribbean, a film whose trailer I watched a whopping 4 times over the preceding months, mainly due to QuickTime Video Player being so slow to watch videos on dial-up internet. My sister is 4 years older than me, so she didn't want me cramping her style and told me to sit in the row behind them instead. As the agreeable little brother, I did so. Set up nicely with a big tub of popcorn and a refreshing soda, ready to be taken on a whirlwind adventure. Unfortunately, the start of the film was ruined for me and everyone else in the vicinity in the packed to the gills theater. In my enthusiasm for eating the popcorn, a couple of pesky husks of corn lodged themselves in my windpipe and refused to buckle. Each time, oh man, this is brutal. Each time I thought I defeated them with a big gulp of soda, they would cruelly remind me of their presence and send me into a coughing fit. 15 minutes and a handful of vicious glares from my sister later, and I was at peace and thoroughly enjoyed the rest of the film. So that's Pirates in 2003.
Yeah.
But the story continues. The second one is in 2008, age of 20, which is quite old, I think, compared to other stories being told. The film in question is none other than The Dark Knight. Oh boy, I was obsessed with this film as soon as it was announced. I had loved Batman Begins and was curious to see what Nolan would serve up next. I had not anticipated a film so much and for so long since Return of the King in 2003, and I had followed every part of the groundbreaking viral marketing campaign with great interest.
That's right, to reveal the Joker's face and all that, yeah.
Man, that was that. And remember, all people were pissed off back then. Do you remember this? We forget.
I don't. About Heath Ledger?
About how Heath Ledger, about his casting and the way he looked, both of those things.
Yeah.
At the time of the film's release, I was visiting my dad, who lived in a small country town. They had one theater with one screen, and they had The Dark Knight lined up for a 7:30 p.m. screening that night. In a larger town, an hour's drive away, their multiplex had screenings all day, starting from 10 a.m. So naturally, I set my sights on that one. My dad had other ideas. The thought of me driving alone on the country highway in his vehicle had him in a real panic. I want to see Batman too, he said. A man whose interest in anything pop culture related was the world's best kept secret. Just the day before, I walked into the kitchen in a t-shirt with the 89 Batman logo on, and he said, Superman.
It feels like a dad joke, doesn't it?
I humored the old man and agreed to wait the excruciating 9.5 extra hours until the evening screening, but boy, oh boy, was it worth it. Never has a film met my lofty expectations and surpassed them to the extent that this one did. It still remains a remarkable filmmaking achievement with a tinge of sadness every time that we never got to see more of Ledger's Joker. Thank you for taking the time to read my rambling stories, and I look forward to hearing more stories on your splendid show. Warmest regards. Thanks, Alex.
Alex, I happen to have a mirror across from where I'm sitting right now, and I caught myself, and I had the dumbest smile on my face while you were reading that. And I was like, you know what? I think this might be one of my new favorite things. People sending in these stories.
I love it.
Yeah.
Like that's every time we get new ones, I always get excited.
Yeah, no, those are great. Both of those stories.
Well, in that vein, here's another one, and this is from Michael Lyons, who says, "Hi again, Zachy and Brian. I had to write to tell you how much I enjoyed your Dune Part 2 episode. I didn't think I could be any more obsessed with the movie in Part 1, but your insights gave me even more appreciation. I liked that Brian said that he's caught Dune fever. I can relate, as I have as well. Like Brian, I will be diving into the books and the Duneverse." Hey, weren't you reading the books, or did you start?
I ordered them, and they are literally supposed to arrive, I think, on Monday.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Zachy, I also loved what you said about how great it is, thanks to Dune Part 2, to see people really enjoying a movie in theaters again. It reminded me of a past movie-going experience. I know that you've been asking listeners to share some of their favorites, and here's mine. I was lucky enough to see the original Star Wars in movie theaters during the summer of 1977.
Wow.
During a visit to the beach with my family that summer, my uncle, who had already seen it, said to my father and me, "Hey, have you guys heard of this movie called Star Wars?" His discussion of the movie with us got my dad and me so excited that we ran out that night to see it.
This is unbelievable, this perspective, isn't it? It's so hard to imagine. This is so cool.
Right?
I love it.
Here's this thing called Star Wars?
Yes. And he has to tell them about it, and they're like, well, that sounds cool. Let's go check it out. Amazing.
I believe it was the first time I saw a movie at night with my parents. So when I first went into the movie theater, I was confused that it wasn't an afternoon matinee and a Disney film starring Dean Jones. I always remember it as my first, quote, grown-up experience at the movie theater, even though I was only 11 years old. As the theater wasn't just filled with kids, but people of all ages, and it was packed with everyone responding to the movie, laughing at Han Solo's wisecracks and applauding when the Death Star blew up at the end. Looking back on Star Wars that summer of 77, it feels like my first communal experience of seeing a movie with others who were enjoying it and engrossed in it as much as I was. So impactful was that movie-going experience that for years after, whenever my dad and I have a similar experience in a movie theater, we always say, that was like when we saw Star Wars for the first time.
Wow.
One other experience I'll never forget from that first time I saw Star Wars was while waiting in line to buy tickets, a gentleman behind me, spotting the sign at the box office, said, $4 for a movie? You got to be kidding me. That man's voice has echoed in my mind every time I've purchased movie tickets since, and the price has continued to go up. Thanks so much for allowing me to share my story, and thanks to both of you for sharing your stories on your wonderful podcast. Best, Michael Lyons.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, that was amazing. That was like getting to go into a time machine and experience something I wasn't even able to do, but I've been very curious about, people discovering Star Wars.
That's, you and I, we talk about how we're part of the Star Wars middle generation, in that it was already a fully formed thing when we were born, but we were already grown-ups by the time the prequel started. And so that's like a very specific experience that we have,
Yep.
But definitely that sense of like, here's this brand new thing. I don't know anything about it. I'm going to experience it on my own.
It's amazing. And they didn't know that that's something that 40 plus years later would still be ubiquitous, Yeah,
I mean, I feel like maybe the closest we had to that kind of experience was watching like The Matrix.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In terms of something
it's like
fresh that we didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Unexpected.
Oh, and by the way, I wanted to mention that Michael has a book, which is terrific. I probably mentioned it on the show before, but to anybody listening, it's called Drawn to Greatness, Disney's Animation Renaissance, a trip back in time to a magnificent era of Disney animation. And Michael also has a podcast, which is terrific, called From Pencils to Pixels, the Animation Celebration Podcast. So if you're a fan of our show, please check out that show. Please check out Michael's book, and tell him we sent you. And one last note here, and this is from Mick Jamison, who says, "Hello, Movie Film Boys. Regarding your Lethal Weapon 2 commentary, I did have to think if there were any contemporary movies that could pull off the balance of humor and violence, and the only one I could come up with was The Nice Guys, which, of course, was written and directed by Shane Black. Although sillier in parts than Lethal Weapon 2, due to a brilliant Ryan Gosling performance, there's an underlying darkness that runs through the film, embodied especially by Russell Crowe's character, but also the relationship between Gosling and his daughter. Peppered throughout the film are instances of extreme violence, played for laughs and straight, and it's interesting that by the end, the two main characters have bonded and become almost family, very similar to the Lethal Weapon dynamic. It would have been interesting to see this explored more in sequels, which of course have yet to materialize. Anywho, love the podcast, and thank you both for the ray of sunshine you provide on a murky world."
Oh, thanks, Mike.
That's very nice of you.
I 100% agree about The Nice Guys. I love The Nice Guys. And I remember watching it in the theater, being so delighted, and also thinking it is so sad we'll never get a sequel to this.
It was really like I felt instantly like watching it, because I went to the press screening, and I was like, I think it's just not going to work. Like, I was like, it's not going to play for the mainstream. And that's what was so frustrating, is being proven right.
Yeah, but there really is something to it. And I don't think Federica would mind me saying this, but like as the years have gone on, she's gotten a little bit more squeamish with things in certain movies that I'm even like, oh, I didn't expect that to be as bothersome to her as it was. But this one she loves. And it does, Mike's right. I mean, it does balance humor and darkness. But the characters are so rounded and so lovable, and you love seeing them together. There's just a humanity throughout it that I think makes it all work. Where the darkness is something you want to see them fight against, versus feeling like the movie is drowning you in it. And
that's a great point. Yeah.
So yeah, I love The Nice Guys.
I mean, the scene when Russell Crowe breaks Ryan Gosling's arm is, I mean, it's probably in my top 10 funniest things ever in a movie.
And when he tosses him the gun.
Yep.
Yeah.
I need to watch that again.
Me too. I think I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just want to shout out Mick's podcast, Masked Faces and Secret Bases, all about comic books. So certainly in my wheelhouse, it's a brand new show that started. And again, it's covering stuff that I suspect people who listen to the show would have at least some degree of affinity for. So check that out, and tell them the Movie Film Boys sent you.
Yeah.
And why don't we take another break? We got some headlines to discuss. And we are back, and some sad news, Brian, just to start things out. Emmett Walsh passed away.
Yeah, that was sad.
One of those like super familiar faces over decades.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think of Blade Runner, and I mean that's the one that came to mind first. And I'm looking at
Blade Runner, Blood Simple. First time I ever saw him, I was like aware of him was in like a Tales from the Crypt episode.
Oh really?
Where he's like. I don't know the details of the episode. I just remember it ends with him being taxidermied at the end. And that's sort of one of those horrific things that stays with you. Yeah. He was in the Flash TV pilot.
Oh, right.
Just a few months ago when we talked through that. Remember, he's Barry Allen's father.
Oh, wow.
But Roger Ebert had a particular affinity for for M. Emmett Walsh. He coined the Stanton Walsh rules, which states that no film with either M. Emmett Walsh or Harry Dean Stanton can be all bad.
I love that.
which I would have to imagine if you're M. Emmett Walsh, that's kind of a nice feeling, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And that's the reason that I went into Wild Wild West with a certain amount of expectations, and then I walked out being very disappointed in Roger Ebert. I have to imagine even Roger Ebert was like, okay, well, they can't all be winners.
Right. Man, this is all over the place. Look, Raising Arizona, Harry and the Hendersons, My Best Friend's Wedding, Slapshot, like where's Blade Runner, Blood Simple. It's just, all over the place.
Well, it's one of those things we talk about often, where being a character actor is probably the best kind of gig if you want to just be a working actor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is something he talked about often because he was in Knives Out just a couple of years ago,
right?
And he's like, I get to just show up for a day or two, I do my thing, and I leave. I don't have to carry the thing. And he's like, I'm just happy to do it.
I think what's so cool about that too is if you're, I don't know, like a certain type of actor and you're always in dramas or something, or some people like a Keira Knightley, who I really like, but she tends to be in a lot of period dramas because that's sort of a little bit of a bread and butter for her. So you're in a similar sort of setting often in the different films that you do. But with a character actor, you could be interacting with Bigfoot one week, you can be in space the next week, you can be in a period drama. Like there's something kind of cool about that. You get to live all these different sort of fantasies, explore all these different worlds.
Yeah.
Just by getting dropped into so many varied things.
Yeah. So definitely an enviable career on screen going back, 50 plus years. And like I said, if you're a working actor, what else can you ask for?
Yeah. Yeah.
M. Emmett Walsh, gone at 88. Here's another passing I wanted to mention. Actor Ron Harper passed away, and I'm fairly certain, Brian, you have no idea who this is.
I Googled him. I did not. Yeah.
So Ron Harper starred on the Planet of the Apes television series as Colonel Alan Verdon.
Okay.
And he was another one of these working actors who starred on a couple different television series, certainly in the 60s and 70s. He was on Garrison's Gorillas, and he, in addition to Planet of the Apes, he was in the final season of Land of the Lost. None of his shows really lasted, but once that sort of starring period ended for him, he turned up in various guest starring roles. He was on a West Wing episode, I guess like 20 years ago at this point. Mm-hmm. But, for me, the Planet of the Apes television series is something that I've had obviously an affinity for, since I first saw it. And I always liked him on it. He was the lead astronaut character on the show. And it's kind of interesting because he really was kind of like a quintessential 1970s action show or adventure show leading man,
Mm-hmm.
And he played that role very well. It's actually just very random because a few weeks ago I was, I've been going through the Apes films with my 10-year-old, and we started watching the television series, and I was watching Ron Harper on the show. I was like, he's really good as this character, like embodying this archetype. And I had that thought, this was maybe like a month or so ago, and then we find out that he has passed away at age 91.
Wow.
And I wanted to take a moment to say, I certainly, that show didn't last. It only lasted 14 episodes. And yet it has lived on to some extent because, there's people like me who are still watching it. I wasn't around when it started, when it aired, I should say, but I watch it still. And I have to imagine that a lot of people will continue to watch Ron Harper's work just because of that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm happy to know who he is.
There you go.
Learn about him today. Yeah.
Now, one other headline I wanted to mention, I wanted to get your thoughts on. So the developments around Scream 7 have just been coming sort of fast and furious over the last several months because, of course, originally, it was going to it was going to be a continuation of what happened in the sixth film. You had Melissa Barrera, you had Jenna Ortega as the new leads, and we were continuing on. And then, as a result of social media comments about the war in Israel and Gaza, Melissa Barrera was fired by Spyglass, the company that produces the company that acquired the Scream rights.
Right.
They fired her, and then Jenna Ortega was like, "Hey, I got to go to peace out." Either because of her prior commitment to the Wednesday show or that plus showing solidarity regardless. They both left, after which the original director, and what was his name? He was
it Christopher Landon? Do I have that right? The guy who did the Death Day movies?
Right, Happy Death Day, right?
Yeah, which I love. I love those movies.
Yeah, Christopher Landon. And so he was like, you know what, I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do. So he bolted.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the latest is that Kevin Williamson, who wrote the original Scream trilogy, is going to direct this new one, and Neve Campbell, who did not appear in the past in the previous movie because they were lowballing her salary.
Mm-hmm.
She is now coming back. I'm assuming alongside Courtney Cox for this new film.
Didn't Courtney Cox get killed?
She did not get killed. She was alive.
Oh,
she even says she's almost killed, and she says, "Tell Sidney he didn't get me."
Oh wow! It's been a while,
which obviously means she's going to die in the next one.
Right.
Now I have many thoughts on this, but I know you're probably an even bigger Scream fan than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize, by the way, the depths of the popularity when I see people showing up in shirts with Ghostface on it and everything. I wouldn't say I'm like some sort of diehard, but yeah, I've seen them all. I enjoy these movies. Yeah.
So how do you feel about this?
I mean, I could come at it from so many different angles. Does it make me happy to see Neve Campbell back? Absolutely. And because then it feels like home, like it's tethered to the films that I know the best, right? And Kevin Williamson being back, I think is really interesting because he's the one who kicked it all off. This is his, the universe from his brain. I will say though, when I first heard that he was directing, I got really excited, but then I had to remind myself that he wrote the first movies. Wes Craven is what gave them the dynamic sizzle, So I don't really know what he's like as a director. I know he did direct a movie called Sick that I think it was sort of a pandemic horror movie, meaning it was like set in COVID, the film itself, the story. And so I don't know. I don't know what his style is like. But yeah, having the original voice back, I think is cool. Having Neve Campbell back is cool. But it also, I don't know, like they were trying to build something new as well, right? They were trying to set up like a new generation of characters. And it kind of makes me sad why Melissa Barrera is gone, not because of the story and not because she wanted to leave. I feel conflicted about that. So yeah, it's not like 100% happy because I feel like there's some murkiness to the reason of why it's all happening that doesn't feel awesome, but I do like the components of where we are now. So I'm hopeful, I guess.
It's a weird one for me because I'm with you. As first of all, I'm like, yay for Neve Campbell because she's like, screw you and your lowball offer. You can kick rocks. And I have to imagine that whatever they came back to her with was more than they offered her, right? So it's like I always say, if you know what you're worth, get what you're worth, right? She was willing to let the parade pass her by, and ultimately they ended up circling back to her. So good on her, and screw the studio people for trying to undercut her, right? That's number one. Number two, the story with Sam and what's her face, the Melissa Barrera and Jenna. Yeah, the two sisters. It's not done yet, right? So this to me, that's the problem, right? It's like doing Star Wars 9, where you just ignore the new characters.
Yes,
and you know what I mean. Oh, but we're gonna have Mark Hamill back. Hey, great. But where's Rey? Oh, she's not in it. Yeah, but I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Didn't she just learn this? And what's she going to do now? And it's like, well, she's not here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the problem, I feel, is that there's something very cynical about it.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I
Right?
mean, that's what I was trying to say. Like, I feel like they were building something. They were trying to build a new generation in this, and now it's just being tossed away. But yes, you saying the word cynical is a good way to sum up how that feels.
And I realize even as I'm saying that, people listening are like, "Oh, Zachy, really? Scream 7 is cynical? Really?" Like,
I mean, yeah, sure. But I still offer my dollars to go watch these things. So I mean, obviously, I care to some degree.
yeah, I mean, that's my only. And the other thing, I mean, we're talking about a horror franchise, right? So I think I said this before, where I'm like, I don't like that Nev Campbell did not leave under her own volition last time, but I was like, hey, Sydney's off camera, therefore she is safe.
Yeah.
Right. And I am like, the longer you go with these things, we've already lost Dewey.
Mm-hmm.
So now we just have Gail and Sydney left. They're the only ones left. Well, somebody's going to go at some point,
I know that's the thing. We've talked about this before, where people have asked the creators of Friends, are you ever going to bring them back and do more Friends episodes? And they're like,
Yeah.
well, in order to do that, we need to undo everything we did with the ending that you liked, because you need to give them new problems. You need someone to have a tragedy. You need stories. And so that's just like you said. I mean, if you continue bringing back beloved characters to a series that's on film 7, you're going to start losing them. They're die. And you don't want to lose these people, but you also, it's a horror movie franchise.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to start doing it because you have to, but it's not fun. It's not fun, and then you miss them. I'm sad Dewey's not around for these other movies, but
yeah, I'm telling you, man, that was traumatic for me when they when they Han Solo'd Dewey.
Yes, yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
I watched that recently, like maybe within the last year, and it's like he shoots Ghostface. He's headed to the elevator, and then he's like, "I got a double tap." I'm like, "Just get in the elevator, man."
I know.
But do we know when that movie's coming out? I'm assuming early part of next year, probably, right?
I would assume they've become January movies, right? So I wonder if maybe they'll shoot this summer and.
Yeah, possibly late this year, but more likely early next year.
I would presume. That seems like that's now the sort of horror movie you're hoping to catch on, like the Megans, and those sorts of films that come out now. Yeah, early in the year.
Yeah. Well, hey, why don't we take a short break and then we'll come back and talk about the new release in theaters right now. And we are back, and you know who else is back, Brian?
Who's that, Zachy?
Why, it's those spectral spook chasers from the Ghostbusters franchise.
They're back!
Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is in theaters now. It opened to $45 million at the domestic box office, which is right around on par with where the previous film opened, and the previous film before that opened, and the previous film before that, I think, if you adjust for inflation. It's remarkably consistent, actually.
I've seen people look at that and try to spin it in such a way where it's a bad thing, saying that they have not gained audience since the last one, if it's opening at the same number. But frankly, I mean, does everything... I know, I know, I can already hear that. Like every movie needs to make $1 billion. Got it. Capitalism. But you know what? If you always say this, Zachy, if you spend accordingly, if you make a movie, not everything has to cost $200 million plus. If you want to make like an 80 million, 100 million, whatever, why not look at then something that still makes hundreds of millions of dollars as a success, right? I think that you kept all those people, when you made such drastic changes to Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
I frankly, to me, I thought it was a positive thing.
I would agree with that. And certainly, Afterlife cost $75 million. This one cost $100 million. So the budget did grow. I don't think it grew drastically, considering the scope of this one was a little bit more. Um, Obviously, I'm curious to see where things go from here, like where it lands totally.
Mm-hmm.
But the film itself is interesting. You know, I actually think that having just watched Ghostbusters 2, literally like the day before, was almost the exact right frame of reference I needed.
Huh. Totally. Sure.
Because this is a film that, and I have not talked to you about this at all. Like,
No.
right?
No.
You can, while you're watching it, you can see the scotch tape from stuff that was chopped out and put together. And there's like little gaps of stuff that's missing clearly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just like Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so the movie ends, and I'm like, that was an experience on par for me with Ghostbusters 2 within a few standard deviations.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm like, well, is this just like that first movie, the original 84 movie? It's not. And what you realize is that movie is kind of a unicorn.
Yes, and it will probably forever.
You know? And so I'm like, well, is this something comparable to Ghostbusters 2? I would say yes. Is this a world I enjoy being in? Yes. And do I enjoy getting to spend time with the original characters and most of the new characters? For the most part, yes. So it's a movie I enjoyed. Is it a movie I loved? No.
You know what? I think we're pretty much exactly on the same page. It's funny. Chad, our mutual friend, he's like, "What did Zachy think last weekend?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, we haven't talked about it." He's like, "You haven't talked about it?" I was like, "No, man, we got to wait. We got to wait a week to talk about this." No, I have to admit, I have been dying to know what you thought. I saw this under unique circumstances in that I saw it twice unexpectedly.
Oh, nice.
So I went and saw it with Chad and our friend Sean. And then I saw it again with Federica because she wanted to see it. And I was like, I'll go. Let's go. I'll go see it again. So I have to say, the first time I saw it, I wasn't super high on it. I think the first scene I was like, oh boy. Like I just didn't think it was very funny.
Right. The Adventure Society.
No, actually I didn't mind that. It was like the patter between the family.
Sure.
I was finding actually a little annoying. And I was like, maybe I don't like these characters. I'm not sure. And then as you watch it, I was like, I think there might be too many characters.
I definitely think there's too many characters.
I mean, at the end, when success is happening, there's like a wide shot where I counted literally 12 people in the frame. And also there's a lot of plot strands in this movie that I don't feel like all of them are properly cooked.
Yeah.
And I came out with that opinion. And then I saw online a lot of people echoing almost exactly how I felt. So I was like, oh wow, okay. And even in Chad and Sean even said they thought it was they didn't really like it, but they thought it was better than Dial of Destiny. I was like, well, there you go. But then I had the sort of unique opportunity to see it again so quickly.
Yeah.
And I have to say I kind of enjoyed it more. Yeah. And I don't know if it's because expectations were now set and I kind of knew what I was getting into. And I found myself walking away still feeling that there were too many characters. And some of the plot was a little bit more scatterbrained than I would like. However, it did flow a little better than I remembered. I think there was just little, like you said, there's scotch tape showing on this thing, but I think my brain accepted it a little bit better on second viewing because I knew where things were going. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but I'm still not sure I'm crazy about the family, but it's not a bad time either. It's, and I think if people were to ask me whether or not they should see it, I would say you're probably going to get out of it what you expect to get out of it. If you think you're going to be like, I wish it was just the old Ghostbusters, it isn't. And you're probably not going to love it. But if you want to go in and see something that's a little overstuffed, but we get some fun new ghost ideas and concepts, and you get to see proton packs and some hijinks, you get that, you know? So I felt a little bit higher on it the second time, but I would still say, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
No, I mean that's basically where I'm at. I feel like the stuff with the family, honestly, I'm totally on board with the idea of it being a family as opposed to like four guys, right? Like because it's different. I'm like, okay, well we've done the four guys, right?
Yep.
So okay, and so you have like Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon. I think they've got fun chemistry together. I enjoy seeing them banter. I like the plot thread about like him. Is he their stepdad? Is he not? Like, I think all of that's interesting,
I think that's one of the threads that's handled better than others.
Yes.
It feels successfully threaded throughout the film.
Yeah. Now that said, I feel I needed more for why Carrie Coon is a Ghostbuster.
Zachy, I was like, maybe I should have rewatched the last one because I don't remember what her sort of deal is. And I like Carrie Coon, but I'm not sure I really like this character. I'm not quite sure what her motivation is.
Yeah, in the last film, we basically find out during the course of it that she's Egon's daughter, right? And it's like she was estranged from him, and then she reconciles with him before he, ghosts away, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this film, it's like other than her being Egon's daughter, like that's McKenna Grace is like, oh, if your name wasn't Spengler, you wouldn't be a Ghostbuster, right?
Yeah.
Well, she's kind of not wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, I'm like we've got. The movie almost throws its hands in the air and it's like we don't know what to do with Finn Wolfhard.
Oh my gosh!
So we're just going to give him the deleted Rick Moranis plot line.
Zachy, yes, I wrote that down. I was like, that is how much they didn't know what to do with him. They gave him the plot from Ghostbusters 2 that was so unnecessary they deleted it from the film.
Right.
Yes.
He's literally hunting Slimer in the firehouse, which is what they said we don't need in the second one.
Yes. Well, so I really, this is nothing against the actor, but I really did not like that character. He drove me nuts. Like, he is so annoying.
Because he didn't feel integral to the plot at all.
Certainly. And so the only thing he does is bitch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's all he does the whole movie. And he like just snipes and has all these like unhelpful comments that are just like mean and rude. It was sort of like hacky Joss Whedon sort of, quips, but they're just so unpleasant. And I was like, I don't like this character. And I have to say, I just want to add real quick. So I really love the Paul Rudd's character and McKenna Grace's character. Yeah. Love them. Right. Yeah. But Carrie Coon's character also, I wasn't quite sure what her motivation is to be there. And also the one scene that really stood out to me, the only moment we really get with her at ease, she's sitting, like she's laying on a couch, scrolling
she's like on her phone.
And her son needs something. And she's like, you're an adult, figure it out. And she doesn't even like look away from her phone. And I'm like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Like, is she a good mom? I don't know. Yeah. So those two were sort of weirdly unpleasant. And I don't know if that's just personal for me or if, maybe the people making this are like, well, that's how my mom is. And I love her, like, I don't know. But there's so much warmth. There's such warmth between Paul Rudd's character and McKenna Grace's character. And they have arcs.
Yes, I personally would have preferred if the opening scene first of all, and let me just say this. We go from the flashback scene in the beginning, which sort of sets up the big bad, and then we smash cut or whatever to the present day. And this is just me, but there's just something about New York, and you see the Ecto with that specific siren going through the streets of New York, and it just makes me happy.
Yep, I agree.
I was like, this is a brand new thing in New York with the Ecto One.
Mm-hmm. And you got the sewer dragon flying through this, this cartoonish looking puppety type ghost, going through. Yeah, I love it. That's what I enjoy about these.
Yeah. So that opening sequence, I mean, I would have just had Gary and Phoebe in the car.
Yeah.
And you have, like I'm just fundamentally having Callie and Trevor as part of the team it didn't make sense to me, because I think honestly, by the time the movie ended, I was like, well, Kumail should have been a Ghostbuster by the end of this thing.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Right?
I loved his energy in this movie. I mean, what he brought to it, I really enjoyed.
I mean, to me, I'm like, give me a Ghostbusters team that's like Paul Rudd, McKenna Grace, Kumail Nanjiani, and James Acaster. You got a team right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Put Patton Oswalt in there.
I was just going to say, or even Patton. He seems almost primed for it because he's a believer, you know, and he's into this stuff. He knows the history. He could be the historian. He's the guy who,
I would have been. Now that said, a lot of people have been grousing about Podcast and Lucky being in this, and I'm not crazy about them, but I didn't find the rationale for them being in the movie particularly contrived. Because I like Podcast being like Ray's little sidekick. I think that's fine.
We are so in sync on this movie. That's what I said both times. I said, I love the duo of Dan Aykroyd and that kid.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed even more with the two of them as like little partners, Yeah.
I liked all their stuff together. I thought it worked really well. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but I 100% agree that them as a duo was very fun.
I do feel like Lucky, I don't think she needed to be in this movie, but I didn't, it wasn't like a debit for me, but I was like, it did, okay, she's got an internship for the summer. It's fine. It didn't feel particularly contrived, but she didn't add anything of value in my opinion.
Agreed. Nothing against her, but it just added to the population of this movie. And I don't know, it's not willing to let go of the older characters, which I can't say I am either. But
right. So
continue to populate, and it's
this is the thing, because I've seen some footage online of like there's a scene where after the damage to the ecto containment unit, where Gary is looking at it, Venkman shows up and he's kind of looking at the damage, and there's like a conversation between Gary and Venkman, right? And they didn't put that in the movie, man. And I'm like you have another Venkman scene and you didn't put it in there? What's wrong with you guys?
He really did. And it's funny because I did leave with the feeling that Bill Murray was very tacked on to this film.
Yes.
And there was like this really weird moment where he's all of a sudden wearing sunglasses inside. right?
It definitely feels like something got cut.
Yeah. And then he just takes them off and you think, what did we just miss?
So this is the thing. A lot of people are like, man, you can tell how uninterested Bill Murray is. And I would offer, if Bill Murray was uninterested, he just wouldn't be in the movie.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, you get his level of interest, which I think is just, hey, I get to show up for a couple days and hang out with my buddies. That's my sense.
I would think. Yeah.
Right. And honestly, I'm like, look, as long as Bill Murray wants to do that, please let him keep doing it.
Yeah, and I got the sense that he was playing that character again, but I think this is the first time. I mean, he's looked older for a while, but this is the first time where I've been like, oh, he's old.
What's crazy is, and the internet has sort of been pointing this out too, how Ernie Hudson is like 5 years older than Bill Murray.
Well, that I didn't know. I did know he was 78 because there's that one picture of him in that black T-shirt looking ripped.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, and by the way, when I was saying Bill Murray is old, I'm not saying like he's old. It just is some sort of, I mean, it happens, and you talk different. You move a little different, and that's the sense I was getting from him in this film.
Yeah. I mean, the other day I was on YouTube and there happened to be like two tiles right next to each other. One of them is like Bill Murray on, one of these late night talk shows. And then right next to it is Bill Murray in 1984 talks about Ghostbusters. And you see those next to each other. You're like, wow. I mean, time comes for us all, Yeah. But I did not mind any of the OG stuff. I just wanted more of it. And so it's frustrating to me that there is at least one more Peter Venkman scene that for whatever reason they left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what, because I don't know what was shot, but I do feel like I wouldn't have minded a little bit more of the story of these new Ghostbusters and their dynamic and why they do it. And I don't know.
I've seen, some people online who are like, we should have gotten like the in-between story between the afterlife and this, of them moving
Sure.
back into the firehouse and having to set it all up. And I'm like, yes, I can see that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, how many of these movies do we want to see that are about the Ghostbusters starting up the Ghostbusters again? You know what I mean?
It's funny. Yeah, I agree with both things you just said. I think I did feel a little disoriented when it started because I didn't remember how the first one ended. So I was a little. I do remember Winston sort of owning the firehouse and all that,
yeah.
but them becoming Ghostbusters and choosing it and all that, I didn't quite remember. But I agree with you. I don't want to see another origin story either.
Yeah, I mean, literally, the first two movies are about them starting the Ghostbusters up. You know,
Yeah.
The first three, really, because the Paul Feig one too.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Now, you have, first of all, the joy that is evident on Dan Aykroyd's face to just be back in this world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's actually a really nice moment that I liked where it's Ray. He's in his shop,
Yeah,
and like he hears the ecto go by, and he just kind of turns and looks, and he's got like the smile on his face.
Yep. His legacy continues.
Yeah, and I was like, that's Dan Aykroyd as much as Ray. You know?
Yep. I remember that well.
Right?
It's funny. I've always liked Dan Aykroyd. I've always liked him, but I've never felt, I'd say, warm for him necessarily, like I do with some other people. But in this one, I felt warm feelings for Dan Aykroyd. It just made me happy seeing him happy in his element. You know, you like you say, you really get a sense of that in this movie.
There's a great moment where it's just Ray and Winston is like kind of laying into Ray.
Yeah.
You know? And first of all, it's just a nice character moment because it's building on, decades of their connection with each other and our connection with the characters, but also it's like great character development of like who Winston is at this point.
Yep.
Who Ray is, and it's something to the effect of like, you can't be doing this. Like, what, like you're going to get yourself killed, Yeah.
Your golden years.
Years.
And then, yeah, Ray's like, this is how I want to spend my golden years.
Yeah. And again, it like the all of the Winston and Ray stuff and the Winston, how he's got like his whole like expanded ghost investigation facility, that sure feels like Sony kind of like building out the franchise a little bit.
Yeah, you could almost get a TV series out of that if you want.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think to that point, this is a film that's trying to service two needs that are maybe at cross purposes, which is we want to obviously service the legacy elements, but we also need to build it out. And at some point it's like pick one, man.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the film, like the tonally, it felt very much in line with the cartoon show, which I think I've said to you, several times. I'm like, the cartoon did a lot of the work in terms of building out the mythology, and so I liked that this felt like almost it could just be an episode of the show. Oh, Garaka and this and that, the other thing. That could easily be the cartoon show. I think the problem is that the quote Frozen Empire part of the title doesn't happen until like half an hour before the movie ends.
See, this helps validate my original feelings about the movie. Even though when I knew everything that was going on the second time I watched it, I did feel like it flowed. But I do remember thinking, actually, I was feeling like, wow, there's a lot going on in this movie, and we're 40 minutes in. And Chad actually leaned over to me and said, how many plots does this movie have? And yeah, there's a lot going on. And yes, the main villain of the movie doesn't even really come into being till about halfway through. And you kind of want to see the effect of this people dying frozen, and what's the mystery, or or you can see a version of that in your head, right? But it doesn't really get unleashed, as you say, until basically the end of the movie.
Basically the end, and that's odd to me because it just feels like the pacing is kind of lopsided.
I don't disagree with that. And there's a lot of plot. I mean, I will say though, I really loved Phoebe and the ghost girl.
Sure.
That was very, you have Phoebe basically because of her age, she's not able to be included with a lot of Ghostbusters action because she's a minor, right? And so she's left out and the family has to leave her behind and she's feeling like, well, all alone. And then I love that scene when she was by herself and then she's playing chess in the park and then a ghost girl appears. I was like, oh, come on. This is the stuff I love. Like lonely ghost character in search of her purpose is like Brian Catnip. So I immediately knew I was going to love that.
Oh, and by the way, so we have William Atherton as Walter Peck. Now he's the mayor. And tell me I'm wrong, but when he's like, no, she's a minor, she can't be a Ghostbuster.
Yes.
I'm like, well, yeah.
He's almost never been wrong in this series. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, because I agree.
The movie's trying to make you be like, look at this asshole. I'm like, yeah, but no, did you see the first scene with her? That's really dangerous.
I know she almost got killed in the first scene. Yeah, but then I like that it gave her this business, and then she gets to she's feeling lonely. This ghost is lonely. They get to, we haven't really gotten to spoilers, have we?
I just assumed you'd insert it at some point.
Well, let's just say right now, spoilers. Moving forward. But as I was saying, I love that setup. That character is immediately intriguing for the things that I love in movies and stuff. But then you have that scene where she's sort of talking with like a voice and she's going to betray Phoebe.
Right.
And it worked. It did work. I wouldn't have minded even more time dedicated to it a little bit in a way.
That was one of the things that I really do feel got left out. Some sense of her backstory beyond what she alludes to.
Yes.
But also her connection with Goraka, which I didn't catch. Same.
I don't quite know. And I know there's sort of like a flirtation between the two of them, and that's kind of interesting. And I wouldn't have minded spending just even like a little more time or a little more details about their individual lonelinesses and the joy that they're finding with one another.
Yeah.
These two unlikely characters finding like a friendship with one another, I think I wouldn't have minded a little bit more out of. And then that would have just even made more of a punch out of the tragedy of the betrayal that's being set up.
Right. Well, and actually in that vein, I should say, it's clearly meant to be a queer love story.
Like a romantic. Yeah, for sure.
But I'm very grateful that Sony didn't lean into that in the marketing. Because that would have been just one more thing for people to lose their shit over.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just let it happen in the story. You know what I mean?
Yep. I feel like everything you're taking the words out of my mouth. Exactly. Like it just kind of presents itself and it's so sweet and so endearing.
Exactly.
And I love discovering it with the film.
Yeah. And right. Exactly. And I think that, what we needed a little bit more of, I think, was, what necessitates Phoebe rejoining the team, right? I think we needed a bit more of like, this is the essential element that only she's able to give.
Yes.
And
along those lines, there's a really big moment where she decides to separate her spirit from her body.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I saw it, I was like, she would never do that. Like, that's such a stupid thing to do. A dangerous thing, let's say.
Yeah.
The second time, I noticed they seeded it a little bit more than I realized the first time I watched it, where her saying she wishes she could understand what it was like to be on another plane. But I do feel like they could have gone even further. I don't know if it had become necessary for her to be able to help this new person she cares about or something, because she's so smart and that's such a dangerous thing to do. I just wish
but she likes her, right? I mean, it's like,
I know, or maybe like but we can't even hold hands or just something like why she would feel so motivated.
I mean, isn't that by implication that when she's like,
so.
right? Like they're doing everything but saying it.
Yeah, you're probably right. Maybe I don't know. Maybe to my mind, I would have liked to have heard it. But
I look, if I were to guess, you've got the folks at Sony who are trying to balance this very delicate dance of creating a family movie with a queer love story in it, and they don't want to upset the apple cart too much.
Yeah, so I guess it's all very a lot of it's implied. I suppose
it's like if you know,
right.
But I look at that and I'm like, well, if I have a platonic relationship with somebody, I'm not going to be like, I want to leave my body so I can occupy the same physical space as you.
Yeah.
Right. You would only do that for love, right?
Right. Or if there was I'm just workshopping now. Like if there was some way that she thinks she could help her move on to the other side or something like, but it's such a catastrophic decision that she makes that I guess I just found myself wanting one more little nudge or detail or something why she would do something that it's like her knowing it's risky, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Versus something, well, I mean, she is young. I was going to say that's something a young person would do without thinking very much about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But no, I mean, it's funny though, but talking about these things, these plot elements, I mean, these are things I liked, so I mean, I think there are things that are enjoyable about this movie. So right? I mean,
I think ultimately for me, right, it's like the movie ends and I'm like, well, I found that enjoyable, right? And I tend to go with my gut when it comes to that. And it's like, well, why? And I'm like, well, this is a world whose mythology I enjoy. And I like that this movie really took an opportunity to build up and build out. So we've got the firehouse and we've got the ecto containment unit, but we're getting a little more into sort of the metaphysics of what it means to be a ghost. That's kind of interesting,
I thought about that too. I was a little curious with this. Oh shoot, I don't remember her name, the ghost girl, but like
Melody.
Like you have ghosts that look like cartoon beasts, right? But then you also have this human being. And well, we had Egon in the last one, right? And so it did make me want to understand the nature of ghosts in this universe a little bit more.
Yeah, well, and that's something I feel like we can build on. The whole research facility and all the different ways. Like that stuff is really interesting to me.
I loved it. The objects, right?
Yes,
they have these haunted objects. I love
Possessor,
where he's like, this is a grandfather clock possessed by a grandfather.
That's right.
That was funny.
Like I said earlier, though, I thought Kumail Nanjiani really funny in this, and I don't know why they wouldn't make him a Ghostbuster.
I don't disagree. Or make Patton. He doesn't even have to be a Ghostbuster, but a part of the team.
Yeah, like definitely at the end when you've got Garaka. Oh, here's the other thing. So Garaka shows up because he to the firehouse. Because he wants to, break open the ecto unit. Okay, and then you've got like 57 proton streams going out, and it's all it's right. Like whatever, right?
Right.
But here's the thing: the movie they defeat the bad guy. All New York converges at the firehouse, not pissed off at the Ghostbusters for having caused all of this, but happy that the Ghostbusters did something, even though New York nobody saw it. Nobody saw what happened. Because it all happened inside the firehouse, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure everything that happened is a direct result of things the Ghostbusters have done in the movie.
All the negative things, all the ice on the beach, and
everything, and
that poor kid being killed at that like smoke shop.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm like, I think it's all the Ghostbusters' fault. I'm pretty sure.
It's so funny that I didn't even think about that. Yeah, like finally, that would be an interesting twist if you knew there was if this was like the Empire Strikes Back of this series, where the mayor suddenly gets his moment and he closes them down, and that's the ending.
Oh, that's the other thing. I wanted a little bit more between Venkman and Peck.
Sure.
Right? I'm like, it's just kind of, I think at the scene when Peck shows up, I think you can hear somebody say Dickless.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, was that person in the mayor's office when when they had that conversation, in the first movie.
Right. Yeah.
Or more amusing to me, that's just like that's just the vibe he gives off. People like that guy has no dick.
I just get the sense with this.
I just get like a dickless vibe from him. But I would have liked a little bit more of a face-off with Venkman, for old time's sake, if nothing else.
Sure, totally.
Because it's like the mayor shows up and Venkman's like, "Oh, Peck, you'll never learn," or whatever he says. And I'm like, that's kind of it. I was like, that's it.
Yeah, it's kind of true. I mean, I guess really the conflict in this film is between Rudd and the mayor.
There was more between the family and the mayor that was in the trailers that got cut out. Feels like.
Yeah. This is one of those rare films where if they did put out a expanded version, I probably would check it out of curiosity.
I feel like it's necessary. Yeah. I mean, Gil Kennan, who directed this, I haven't seen the Poltergeist remake. Have you seen it?
No, but I'm a fan of the first one. I'm curious. I've not seen it though.
My point is, I would assume that he did not have final edit on this movie.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure there was an edict by Sony, get this thing under 2 hours.
Which I appreciate.
Sure.
I'm not going to lie.
I don't have a problem with that, but I do feel like there were choices made that I'm curious about. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, sure.
And without having seen the deleted scenes, I can't comment on that. But to your point, I feel virtually certain that we're going to get an extended cut of this.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'd check it out.
Yeah. So ultimately, like I said, the movie ended. I was there with my 13-year-old and my 10-year-old, and they both liked it, and I was like, well, that was fun,
There you go.
And at the end of it, that's like, I'm like, would I watch another movie set in this, as part of this series? Yeah, I'm down,
Definitely. I wouldn't say I walked out of the theater on fire for it. No. I wasn't like giddy and excited, but I'm enjoying talking about these moments from it, so I did enjoy these moments, and I think that's worth noting, and I would come back again. So
yeah, I think the only advice I'd offer for the future, because of course I'm sure the Ghostbusters creative team is busy hoping to hear our specific advice. I'd say just trim down the core cast and find like a proper mix of new and old. I love the idea of Winston is the money guy.
Mm-hmm.
Ray is the elder statesman who kind of, helps with the research or whatever. And then, you've got like a functional Ghostbusting team,
Yeah. And I mean, actually, I would say what you're saying, for what it's worth. I think it's worth a lot. I think your notes have been really great. I think adding Kumail and Patton as resource characters would be great too. Although Kumail has a unique set of skills that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that would really only be applicable under certain circumstances. And other than his whole fire thing, he's just like a guy, right?
Totally.
So, he
comes from a lineage of, so they even say in the film, like, wow, those people were kind of like Ghostbusters from the past.
Yes, that's right.
So,
yeah. So it kind of tracks. And like I said, I found James Acaster amusing. I think I would have put him on the team,
Yeah.
And then, not everybody needs to be a Ghostbuster. You can have them in the mix, but you should have a core team of grown-ups as Ghostbusters.
Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah. I just thinking again of that first scene, I and maybe it's going back to what we were talking about much earlier, where it's like, I'm not quite sure why the mom is there. I'm open to it. I just want the movie to let me know why.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting. You have this family, like a mom, a dad figure, and two kids saving the city. Like there's something, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. But to your point, I mean, the movie itself couldn't figure out what to do with some of these characters.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So I'm like, let's say they do this again in a couple of years. Well, by then, Phoebe will be a grown up.
Mm-hmm.
So you have her, you ship Trevor off to college. You have Callie be like, hey, I'm gonna hold down the fort.
Mm-hmm.
And you have Gary and Phoebe and slot in 2 other people. You got a reasonable team.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know?
Works for
Well,
me.
there we
go. Wait, can I wrote down my favorite line from the movie, which was when Patton Oswalt is in the library and he's going through the wax recordings. And he's like, oh, here's an interesting one. This is Mary Todd Lincoln saying the F word.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think she saw a moth.
It was so funny. I hear because when we went, it was just me and the boys, and there was like not that many other people, and I just busted out laughing, and they both looked at me like, "What in the world,
dude?" That was the hardest I laughed the whole movie. Apparently, she had just seen a moth.
Wow. Okay. So I had no idea what you were gonna end up thinking about this movie. So that's very funny that we ended up landing at a lot of the same places.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, that was our thoughts on Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. Be sure to let us know your thoughts. I know we have a lot of Ghostbusters fans, and that's the other thing, right? This is a franchise that what you think of it going forward relies a lot on what you thought of it when you were first exposed to it.
Yep.
Because if you were an adult or a teenager or up when the first film came out, you've locked into that, and everything else is crap.
Yeah.
And then there are people who were kids when the first one came out, or who were kids, after the first 2 came out, and in which case you tend to think of it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing I see a lot of is these new ones, this one and the previous one, they're not funny, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the original film is very funny, but it's funny people in serious situations.
Yeah. It's a lot of reactionary, like watching those specific type of characters react to things is funny.
Exactly, right? So it's all about how you view it. And I've said before, I think that's where Paul Feig went awry. I don't think he ever got that when it comes to the reboot film.
Right.
Which is already 8 years old, by the way. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Yeah, that is crazy.
Right? Because that's just a straight up comedy. And I think Ghostbusters needs to straddle both of those worlds,
Totally.
But if we bring in the people I was saying, you got a funny team.
I think so. I like the people that are in this movie. So if they can figure out how to slot them, I'm all in favor.
How to slot them, exactly. But we'll see. I'm curious if there will be another one. I suspect that there will be in some way, shape, or form. And if they keep the budget down, they might be able to crank a few more entries out of it. But like I said, let us know your thoughts, and we'll be back next week with our thoughts on Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire.
Yeah.
Or as I call it, Godzilla times Kong.
Yeah, I know. Apparently you're not supposed to say it. That's what I heard on another podcast. The director had said, "No, the X is silent." I'm like, what does that?
So it's just
mean?
See, what I would have liked then if it was Godzilla Kong, just one word.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I have to admit, I've seen this trailer so many times. I really hope I enjoy this.
The only I've not seen it nearly as many times as you, because I time my trip to the theater to get there. I know how long until Nicole Kidman starts talking about how great theaters are, and so that's when I usually walk in.
I am beginning to learn it, because it used to be there was about 15 minutes of trailers before the film, but I would go because I'd kind of want to see the trailers, and then you start to see them too many times. But there was an uncertainty to how to time that. Now I'm noticing, I'm speaking about Regal, there is 10 minutes of ads, like car ads, M&Ms, whatever, and then you have the 15 minutes of trailers. So it's almost 25 to 30 minutes before the movie starts. So, and I saw Field of Dreams, an old movie, like a revival movie playing, and they had 30 minutes of ads before it. And so when we saw the One Life movie the other day, it was an experiment to show up late.
Okay.
And it worked. I mean, we sat
See?
down and we still caught 10 minutes of ads, but we know we saved ourselves from 20 minutes of other.
Yeah, it's gotten ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I actually have some degree of enthusiasm for it, is my point.
Yeah.
And I will be watching that tomorrow with all the boys. So I'm looking forward to that. But we'll be back here talking about that next week. So until next time, if you have any questions or comments for us, you can email us at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit like on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast, and message us there. Also, as always, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, leave a star rating. Every little bit helps. Anything you want to hype up, Brian?
Yeah, the Young Jedi Adventures show had dropped episodes back in February, but those are there, going strong, still seeing new enthusiastic responses to them, which is really exciting. So people can check out Young Jedi Adventures on Disney Plus, and it also airs occasionally on Disney Junior.
There you go. And as for me, you can read my reviews at the San Francisco Chronicle. Like I said, my review of X-Men 97 is there right now, and I'll be writing some other stuff soon too, so keep an eye out for that. With that, on behalf of my partner Brian Hall, my name is Zaki Hassan. This has been Movie Film 287. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, folks.
Welcome, friends, it's the Movie Film Podcast. Podcast, enjoy the show. Zachy and Brian are talking about movies. Movie Film Podcast on the radio.